Hello, I'm Nisa Chavez, and today I will be talking about and reviewing Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doughty. Caitlin is a mortician and she now owns her own funeral home. She is also a blogger and author of 3 books centered around death, as well as a YouTuber. She has over 1 million subs, creating series like Ask a Mortician. Throughout her work, we sense that she is a strong advocate for death acceptance, as well as the reformation of Western funeral death industry practices. More on that to come. The biggest reason I chose this book was because I do plan to go into business, and my top dream right now is that I would like to become a funeral director. So I picked this up with the intention of gaining knowledge, facts, and such from the funeral industry, as much as I can learn. I was previously a subscriber of Caitlin, the author, on YouTube, and I just knew that this book would be funny and that I'd get along most likely with the writing style, as well as the way she would give information. So I wanted something slightly entertaining and informative about the death care industry. This book obviously mainly covers her first few years working at a crematory, so it is filled with a lot of info. Overall, I just wanted more background on the industry and more guidance to see if it was the right career for me. I'd like to share some snippets that I found interesting or informative. The book has 19 chapters and is 214 pages in length, and each chapter is titled something creative having to do with something she experienced in her career. So the first chapter is actually named Shaving Byron. Some of these are really interesting, like toothpicks and jello, push the button, pink cocktail, and it has to do with her job. So it's really not just a pink cocktail. It's actually, she's referring to the embalming fluids that she would have to mix. Shaving Byron, she has to shave a dead person. And it was entertaining to read parts like this. She puts it in a way that's respectful, but she has her own unique sense of humor to add to any situation. The book does have a timeline from when she applies for the cremation job that she talks so much about, up until the time where she decides to go to mortuary school. One of the most interesting things I got out of this book was the fact that her and I were very similar in our dreams of what we would do as a funeral director. I wanted to share a couple sentences talking about her dream. She speaks about a funeral home that she would call La Belle Morte. It's French, not sure if I said that right. Explains this would be a place where families could come to mourn their dead in exciting new ways and put the fun back in a funeral. The solution was to do away with all the nonsense of traditional funerals. And she was excited about catering to celebrities, as well as getting rid of expensive caskets, tacky flower wreaths, and embalmed corpses in suits. She says in her imagination that La Belle Morte appeared as the promised land of postmodern designer funeral experience. Now, I think it's really interesting that she shares this dream because I had a similar concept. When I think of my dream as a funeral director, I imagine having my own funeral home that's specifically for green burials. It would focus on sustainability. I am into sustainability, and so looking for green burials, it seems like something that's not really big, at least not yet. It's starting to become more in demand, and I'm hoping I'll kind of be there when it's at its climax and then make that a normalized way. The funeral home I'm going to be working with soon here has only just recently added a green burial solution. I think it's important that all types of death rituals are kind of accessible, especially sustainable burial options. As Caitlin works more and more at the crematory, Caitlin starts to question her own thoughts on death and the practices that the Western world has. She explains, "As I gained more experience in the crematory, I no longer dreamt of the gracious cover-ups of La Belle Morte. I began to realize that our relationship with death was fundamentally flawed." For the rest of the book, she goes on a spiral of just talking about how her relationship with death, as well as our America, is flawed in her eyes. This topic is the main centerport beef of this book. And by the end of it, she's really confident in how her idea of death practices should be. One of the more interesting chapters was when she talked about other cultures' beliefs in death and their rituals. She talks about the Wari tribe and how they're cannibalistic. As an American, we see that and our mind instantly goes to a bad place, to say the least. This tribe were not vengeful, flesh-hungry savages. desperate for the taste of grilled human, and neither were they after the protein the human flesh provided. She says, if we had been born in the warrior tribe, the cannibalism we dismiss as barbarism would have been our own cherished custom, one that we engage with sincerity and conviction. One really interesting point she makes is that Americans don't necessarily believe in the death industry practices as of currently. We don't believe in embalming and these fancy caskets. We don't have religious beliefs tied to the material and how they necessarily bury a body. She spends a few chapters talking about how embalming is not an art. She explains there's a narrative created by mostly the North American funeral industry that situates modern embalming practices within an old age tradition, an art form passed down through the millennia from the ancient Egyptians, original masters of corpse preservation. The present-day funeral director acts as the bearer of their ancient wisdom. She adds on, saying, modern embalming was not born from religion, but more stronger forces altogether. Marketing and consumerism. The chemical preservation of the corpse had no place in American death customs prior to the Civil War in the mid-19th century. Also, there is no law that requires embalming on a body. So it wasn't until this gruesome war that people were really desperate to get their loved ones back that it became more normalized and now a standard practice. From a few decades, the embalmer went from someone just trying to make money on the battlefield to a specialist. Manufacturers of embalming chemicals aggressively marketed the image of the embalmer as a highly trained professional and a technical mastermind, an expert in both sanitation and the arts, creating beautiful corpses for public admiration. Nowhere else were art and science so expertly combined. After her own experiences with embalming bodies, she says there was no way at all she would embalm her mom like this. She kicks it with saying North Americans practice embalming, but we do not believe in embalming. It is not a ritual that brings us comfort. It's an additional $900 charge on our funeral bills. The heavy marketing really spiked up in the 1950s since it represented a wonderful opportunity for gaudy excess. You know, everyone saw the embalmed body as art. She speaks with her coworker on how they really don't have enthusiasm for the art of embalming and that they don't agree with the costly practices. One of the most relatable lines was when she said that she hated the fact that funeral directors were business people. That is definitely something I factored in when thinking of this career as my career. She really hates on embalming quite a bit. She says it really sucks that they have to pay $175 to $500 for setting the features. She says the process used to make someone appear natural are often highly unnatural and quite aggressive too. She touches back on her own ideas, saying that it was that naive idea of someday opening La Belle Morte, a funeral home for a one-of-a-kind personalized death. But what we needed wasn't more additions to the endless list of merchandise options. Not when we are missing rituals of true significance, rituals involving the body, the family, emotions, rituals that can be replaced with purchasing power. Another interesting tidbit. Coworker explains bigger people decompose faster, and that's why they stink more. I found tidbits of information like this just really interesting, something to think about. One of my favorite ties she makes is when she talks about Buddha and the story of the Buddha. It was life without corpses trapped behind the palace walls that had prevented him from reaching enlightenment. If you know the story of the Buddha, this makes a lot of sense. I went highlighter happy with this page. She basically explains that we should get more in touch with death and the idea of it and accept it more and bring it back in the culture as something that's normalized and not hidden away so much so. She puts power back in dying and the idea of death. She serves Kafka, saying the meaning of life is that it ends, death is the engine that keeps us running, giving us motivation to achieve, love, learn, and create. She mainly wants people to learn to accept death, the death of loved ones and the death of themselves. She explains how she mentally wanted to choose how she would die, which is almost prepared for it, excited, willing to, accepting. Silence of death of the cemetery was no punishment, but a reward for a life well lived. And that's where she ends the book off. The book starts off saying, looking morality straight in the eye is no easy feat. To avoid the exercise, we choose to stay blindfolded in the dark to the realities of death and dying. But ignorance is not bliss, only a deeper kind of terror. When she first started embalming, she explained that each person was a new adventure, and she was just really excited to take care of bodies, and I thought that was cute, because honestly, that's how I see it. She also kind of destroys her and my own dream by saying things like how the crematory building was quite boring. She imagined that her day-to-day would involve placing a body in the giant machine, settling down, eating berries, and reading a novel as some poor man was cremated. At the end of the day, she'd take a train home in thoughtful reverie, having come to some deeper understanding of death. Explains that she just wants to work on taking care of those corpses who can't take care of themselves no longer. Caitlin goes on to have her own funeral home where they work on death acceptance practices. One of her outlooks was that death for her was like a never-ending sleep. She longed for it. In spite of her fear for living, she chose not to die. In conclusion, I gave this book a 5 on Goodreads. It was exactly what I anticipated, and that's why I picked it up. Overall, I enjoyed the book, and if I do continue my career in the funeral industry, I will definitely be sure to check out her 2 other books. As far as my personal aspirations, I have done a lot of thinking about my career, like laying awake at night, questioning if I even can handle a dead body. I didn't have a too good experience with the cadaver recently. I'm hoping I can get used to it and stick it out. I do have backup careers, so no worries. I do wish I could talk about this book more, but time's up. Thanks for watching.